The smell of wood smoke and cinnamon has always been my favorite part of the holidays. For years, that smell meant home. It meant my wife, Dorothy, God rest her soul, humming hymns while she rolled out biscuit dough on the counter. It meant our son, Robert, sneaking bites of pie crust when he thought nobody was looking. It meant a house full of noise and love and the kind of warmth that made the cold outside feel like it belonged to somebody else's life. But on that particular Christmas Eve, as I pulled my truck into the long paved driveway of my son's new house, the smell drifting from the chimney didn't bring me any comfort at all. It brought me a low, sinking dread, the kind that sits in your stomach like a stone. I had a feeling, deep down, that I was about to walk into a room where I wasn't wanted, and I just didn't know yet who would make that clearest. It's a strange thing, being a father. You spend your whole life building something for your children, brick by brick, lesson by lesson, hoping that when they grow up, they'll carry a piece of you with them. And said, you hope they'll remember the sacrifices, not just the mistakes. You hope they'll remember you as the man who worked with his hands so they wouldn't have to, the man who never missed a game or a school play even when he was running on 4 hours of sleep. But sometimes life doesn't let you keep the story you wanted. Sometimes the people you raised grow into a world you don't recognize, and you become a stranger standing at the edge of it, waiting to be let in. That's exactly how I felt standing outside Robert's front door that evening. The house was enormous, brand new, with tall white columns out front like something off a magazine cover. I smoothed down my good flannel shirt, the same one I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral 3 years back. It still fit fine. I'd ironed it the night before at my kitchen table, taking my time, making sure the collar sat right. I didn't want to give anybody a reason to look at me twice. Not that it mattered in the end. Some people decide what they think of you before you ever open your mouth, and no amount of ironing changes that. The door opened before I even had the chance to knock. Robert stood there, 34 years old, but looking worn thin in a way I hadn't seen on him before. His smile came a half second too late, like he'd remembered at the last moment that he was supposed to be happy to see me. Dad, he said, his voice pitched a little too bright. Hey, you found it okay. Come on in. Come in. I stepped through the door and the smell of the fireplace was swallowed up almost immediately by something sharper, a candle burning somewhere, expensive and floral. The inside of the house looked like nobody actually lived there. Cream-colored furniture, a chandelier hanging over the entryway, a curved staircase that seemed built more for looking at than walking up. I stood there for a second just holding the bottle of wine I'd brought, a decent bottle, not the cheapest one on the shelf but not the fanciest either, and I suddenly felt like it was the wrong thing to have brought. Everything in that house looked like it cost more than my truck. Let me get your coat, Robert said, but he didn't quite reach for it right away. I shrugged it off myself, and as he took it from me, I caught him glance at the frayed cuff on my sleeve, just for a second, before he turned to hang it in the closet by the door. That's when I heard the voice. It came from the sitting room, cutting clean through the soft holiday music playing from some hidden speaker. Quest. Robert, is that your father? Good Lord, I was starting to think he'd gotten lost trying to find civilization. My stomach dropped. That was Diane, my daughter-in-law's mother. I'd met her exactly twice before, once at the wedding and once at a hospital when my grandson was born, and both times she'd looked at me the way you'd look at something tracked in on the bottom of a shoe. She was sitting on the cream sofa with her legs crossed, a glass of red wine balanced in one hand, dressed like she was headed to a gala rather than a family dinner. She didn't get up. She just looked at me over the rim of her glass with a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good evening, Diane, I said, keeping my voice pleasant. Merry Christmas. Thank you for having me. Oh, we didn't have much say in the matter, she said, setting her glass down on a coaster with a delicate little clink. Robert insisted, said something about family, being family. I told him we were perfectly happy keeping things small this year, just us, but he wouldn't hear it. She said it like I was a chore that had been assigned to the household, something to be managed and endured. My daughter-in-law, Whitney, came around the corner from the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was a pretty woman, always put together, the kind of person who looked camera-ready even when she wasn't expecting company. When Robert first brought her home, I thought she was a good match for him, sharp and driven. Over the years, I'd started noticing other things too. The way she'd correct him at the dinner table in front of other people. The way she'd wince, just slightly, whenever I mentioned my old job. Mother, Whitney said, in a tone that was more amused than corrective, like Diane had made a slightly off-color joke rather than insulted a man in his own son's house. Behave. I'm simply being honest, Diane replied, waving a hand. It's Christmas. We're all entitled to a little honesty. I looked around the room, searching for the one face that made all of this worth it. My grandson, Caleb. He wasn't in the room, and something in my chest eased a little at the thought that he was probably off somewhere doing what 9-year-olds do, oblivious to the tension simmering in the air. Robert put a hand near my back, not quite touching, and guided me toward an armchair in the corner, the one farthest from the white furniture. Dad, sit. Dinner's almost ready. I picked a seat on a wooden bench by the window instead of the plush armchair. I didn't trust myself not to leave a mark on that fabric. Diane watched me settle in, her eyes tracking down to my boots, the same boots I'd worn to work every day for almost 30 years, scuffed at the toe but clean. You know, Walter, she said, using my first name the way you'd flick a piece of lint off a sleeve. My late husband always said, if a man can't be bothered to dress for an occasion, he shouldn't bother showing up at all. Gerald was in finance. He understood the importance of appearances. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice even. I spent 30 years running crews on construction sites, ma'am. We didn't dress up much for that kind of work. Just what keeps you upright and safe. I thought I looked fine for tonight. Bless your heart, she said. And there it was, that phrase people say when they mean the exact opposite. I'm sure you did your best. I glanced over at Robert, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he was staring hard at his phone like it held the secrets of the universe. He hadn't looked up once since Diane started talking. I realized, with a slow, sick feeling, that this was probably not the first time he'd disappeared behind that screen while someone tore into me. It was a practiced kind of absence. The conversation rolled on without me for a while. They talked about a ski trip to Aspen, a renovation on the guest house, the private academy Caleb attended where tuition alone probably cost more than I'd made most years running a crew of 12 men. I sat quietly, feeling myself shrink with every word, feeling like a piece of furniture nobody had thought to move out before company arrived. Whitney finally called everyone to the dining room. I felt a small wave of relief just at the idea of a change of scenery, something to break the current running through that sitting room. I followed behind, past a hallway lined with framed photos, none of which included me or Dorothy, and into a dining room that looked like it belonged in a furniture catalog. A long table set with more silverware than I knew what to do with, a centerpiece of white candles and pine branches that probably cost more than my monthly heating bill. And there, at the far end of the table, swinging his legs because they didn't reach the floor, was Caleb. He was in a little sweater vest and a bow tie, looking about as comfortable as a cat in a bathtub. The moment he spotted me, his whole face lit up. "Grandpa," he shouted, already halfway out of his chair. "You came." Something in my chest loosened for the first time all night. "Hey there, bud," I said, and I meant it, the first real smile I'd managed since walking through that door. "There's my favorite guy in the whole world." "Caleb," inside voice, Diane snapped before he'd even finished standing. "And sit up straight. You're not an animal." Tile. The seating arrangement, I quickly realized, had been decided with military precision and not in my favor. Whitney at the head, Robert at the foot, Diane on one side with an empty chair beside her clearly meant for Caleb, and Whitney's brother, a smug-looking man in a checkered blazer, on the other. I was directed, politely but firmly, to the very last chair at the far end, practically in the corner. "You don't mind, do you, Walter?" Whitney said, with a smile that didn't quite match her eyes. "We like to keep the immediate family close together. You understand, immediate family. I was the father of the man who'd built this house with a mortgage I was pretty sure he couldn't actually afford, and I wasn't immediate family." I swallowed that whole and nodded. "Of course, wherever's easiest." I sat down, and to Diane's visible irritation, Caleb scrambled out of his assigned seat and plopped himself right next to me instead. "Caleb, honey," Diane cooed, patting the chair beside her. "Come sit by Grandma Diane. You don't want to be way down there, do you?" "I want to sit with Grandpa," Caleb said, plain and simple, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "He built real buildings. He has the best stories. Point. He poured concrete, sweetheart," Diane corrected, sniffing. There's a difference between building something and pouring the foundation someone else designed. That one landed harder than I expected. I hadn't gone to college. I didn't have a degree hanging on my wall. But I'd spent 3 decades reading blueprints, keeping men safe 40 stories up, making sure buildings that people trusted with their lives didn't come down around their ears. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was work that mattered, work I was proud of. I guess to people like Diane, pride didn't count for much if it didn't come with a title. Dinner was served, and it smelled incredible, ham and roasted vegetables and some kind of cranberry sauce that had clearly never come from a can. I couldn't taste much of it. The air in that room sat on my chest like a weight. Diane held court through most of the meal, talking about her charity gala committee, her recent trip to Italy, how impossible it had become to find reliable contractors these days. Speaking of which, she said, turning her attention to me with a little smile that made my stomach clench. Walter, you'll have to forgive my curiosity, but I'm surprised they let you sit at the table with us tonight. Usually the help eats in the kitchen. She laughed, a bright little laugh with nothing warm in it. I'm only teasing, of course, though that is an interesting shirt. Where do you find those these days? A store? I said quietly. The table went still. I felt every eye on me, waiting to see how I'd react. My hands found their way into my lap, out of sight, so nobody would see them shaking. Robert finally spoke, addressing his mother-in-law without quite meeting her eyes. Diane, come on, let's just enjoy dinner. But she wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I'm simply curious, Robert. I want to know, Walter, what's it like? Being retired without much put away. It must be freeing in a way. No responsibilities, no expectations. Everyone was looking at me now. 5. Whitney studied her wine glass like it held the answers to a very interesting question. Her brother wore a look of open amusement. And Robert, my own son, stared down at his plate, cutting his ham into smaller and smaller pieces like the answer might be hiding underneath it. I took a breath and kept my voice level. I wouldn't call it freeing, ma'am. It's tight some months. But I raised my son. I kept a roof over our heads for 30 years. I never missed a mortgage payment. Oh, you own a home? Diane said, feigning shock, one hand pressed to her chest. I assumed you were renting somewhere modest. A home? How wonderful for you. She laughed again, and this time her brother joined in, a low chuckle that made my face burn hotter than it already was. It wasn't even the insult that hurt the most in that moment. It was watching my son's shoulders sink lower and lower, watching him let this woman humiliate his father at his own table and say absolutely nothing to stop it. I told myself to hold on, just a few more hours. One of the one. I could survive a few more hours if it meant getting to spend Christmas Eve with my grandson. I turned to Caleb, desperate for a piece of the evening that didn't hurt. So, Bud, what do you think of the ham? He leaned over, whispering like it was a state secret. I like the rolls better. Can I just eat rolls for dinner? I laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd had all night. You know, when I was your age, I tried that exact thing. My mother told me if all I ate was bread, I'd turn into a loaf myself. His eyes went wide with wonder. Really? No, buddy, I'm pulling your leg. But let's leave room for dessert, all right? He nodded seriously, like we'd struck an important deal. Then he started tugging at his collar, wincing. Mom, my bow tie is too tight. It's choking me. He made an exaggerated gagging noise, sticking his tongue out for effect. Caleb, stop fidgeting, you look very sharp, Whitney said without really looking at him. But it hurts, he whined, tugging harder. Diane shot a look down the table at me like I had personally orchestrated the disturbance. Can someone please control that child? We're trying to have a civilized dinner. I can fix it, Bud, I said, already standing. Give me a second. Dad, just leave it. He's fine, Robert muttered, not looking up. It's no trouble at all, I said, and I walked around the table anyway. I knelt down next to Caleb's chair, working the little clip-on bow tie loose with careful fingers. I'd spent enough Sundays wrestling with my own tie over the years to know exactly where the pinch was coming from. There you go, Bud. Better? Thanks, Grandpa, he said, grinning up at me, and for one small second, everything else in that room disappeared. As I made my way back to my seat, passing near the head of the table, Diane cleared her throat, loud and deliberate. Oh, and Walter, while you're up, would you mind clearing a few of these plates? Force of habit, I suppose? That was the moment something in me went still and cold. It wasn't loud, that stillness. It was quiet, and it was final. I stopped walking and turned to face her directly. I'm not going to clear the plates, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm a guest in my son's home tonight. I'll sit back down and finish my meal. Thank you. The room went absolutely silent. You could hear the candle flames flickering. Diane's face flushed a deep, blotchy red, the kind of color that comes from being told no when you're not used to hearing it. Excuse me, she said, rising slowly from her chair, her voice climbing. You want to sit? You want to play the honored guest tonight? She stood up so fast, her chair scraped hard against the hardwood floor. 6. Before I even registered what was happening, before Robert or anyone could move, she crossed the room in 3 quick strides and slapped me across the face. The sound of it cracked through the dining room like a rifle shot. My head whipped to the side. I tasted copper in my mouth where my teeth had caught the inside of my cheek. For a moment, everything went white and ringing, and then the pain settled in, sharp and burning and humiliating in a way that had nothing to do with the physical sting. That, she hissed, standing over me while I held my cheek, is for having the nerve to talk back to me in my daughter's home. You come in here with your secondhand shirts and your factory manners, thinking you belong at this table. You don't. You never did. I looked up at my son. My vision was blurred, whether from the slap or something else I couldn't say. Robert, I said, my voice cracking. Are you going to say something? Anything? Anything. Anything. Robert's face had gone pale as paper. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tight his knuckles turned white. For one flickering second, I thought I saw the boy who used to run to me crying whenever some other kid on the playground pushed him around. The boy who trusted me to fix everything. Then that flicker died out completely. Dad, he said, and his voice came out small and pathetic, nothing like the man I'd raised him to be. Just apologize, please. Just say you're sorry to her, and we can sit back down and finish dinner like normal people. My heart didn't just break in that moment. It shattered into pieces. I doubted I'd ever fully find again. It wasn't the slap that did it. It was my own son, standing there, watching his father get struck in his own dining room, and asking me to be the one to apologize. Apologize? I repeated, my voice shaking now. She hit me, Robert. She just hit me across the face. I know, he said, staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole. But you provoked her. You could have just cleared the plates. Just say sorry and we'll move past it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked around the table for anyone who might contradict him. Said, Whitney was folding her napkin with great interest, her face a mask of complete indifference. Her brother sat back in his chair with a small, satisfied smirk, clearly enjoying the show. And Diane stood there, with her arms crossed, chin tilted up, victorious. Well? Diane said sharply, are you going to apologize? Or should I call the police and have you removed from this property for trespassing? I sat there, frozen, the whole world narrowing down to that single, unbearable moment. I couldn't fight back, not against a woman, not in front of my grandson. I couldn't find the words to explain that all I'd wanted was one quiet Christmas Eve with my family. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out but a broken, stammering breath. That's when a small, clear voice sliced straight through the tension. Mom, it was Caleb. He'd slipped out of his chair without anyone noticing and was standing a few feet away, holding his tablet up in both hands, his face lit by the glow of the screen. Mom, he said again, his voice trembling but growing steadier. Grandma Diane. Whitney turned, startled. Caleb, sweetheart, go sit down. This is grown-up business. But Mom, he said, louder now, his chin lifted despite the tremble in it. Something happened. I have to tell you something. Caleb, we'll talk later, Whitney said, reaching for him, but he took a step back, out of her reach. No, Mom. His voice cracked through the room like a whip, and everyone froze. Listen to me. I was live streaming. I was showing my friend Tyler the Christmas tree earlier, and I forgot to turn it off. It's been recording this whole time. The blood drained from my face. I watched the same thing happen to Whitney. her cheeks going white as chalk. Diane's victorious expression cracked and fell apart, replaced by something close to panic. "What on earth are you talking about?" Whitney demanded, her voice rising into something shrill. D. D. 10. D. Turn that off right now." But Caleb wasn't listening to her anymore. He turned to look at me instead, his grandfather, the man who had just been humiliated and struck in front of him. Then he turned the tablet toward the room, toward all of us, and spoke directly into the camera, his voice shaking but clear. "Grandma Diane," he said, tears filling his eyes now. "You're live right now. Everybody watching can see what you just did." A collective gasp swept the table. Diane lunged for the tablet, her hand grasping at the air. "Give me that, you little," she started, but Caleb was faster, darting behind me and gripping the back of my shirt with both small fists. Diane stopped short, her face twisting between fury and dawning horror as the reality of what had just happened settled over her like a bucket of ice water. Every insult, every sneer, every single second of that slap had just been broadcast live to whoever happened to be watching. The stream cut off a moment later, the screen going dark, but the damage had already been done. Caleb had captured the whole thing, his grandmother striking me, screaming at me, calling my clothes secondhand rags. He'd captured his own mother sitting silently through it. He'd captured his father telling his own beaten father to apologize for being assaulted. Nobody in that room moved for a long moment. Thing. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked on, marking each second of the silence. Whitney finally spoke, her voice trembling with a fury I'd never once seen her direct at her mother. "Caleb, who did you send that to?" Caleb looked up at me first, his eyes wide and wet, then back at his mother. He took a shaky breath, and then he asked the question that would hang over that room for the rest of the night. "Isn't it wrong to hit people?" he asked, so simply, so plainly, that it landed harder than anything Diane had said all evening. "Grandma hit Grandpa. I saw it, and nobody did anything." End quote. He was right, and every single adult at that table knew it. They had all failed the most basic test there is, and they'd been caught, not by some security system, but by a 9-year-old boy who understood right from wrong better than any of them. Robert finally lifted his head. The mask of pathetic silence had cracked wide open, replaced by something like dawning horror. "Oh my God," he whispered, staring at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time all night. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Whitney looked like she might be sick right there at the table. Diane had one hand pressed over her mouth, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal searching for an exit that didn't exist. But I didn't care about any of their panic anymore. All that mattered to me in that moment was Caleb. I knelt down in front of him, ignoring the throb in my jaw, and put both hands gently on his shoulders. "Buddy," I said, my voice thick, "can I see the tablet for a second?" He handed it over, his small fingers cold against mine. I looked at the screen. The stream had autosaved, and a notification showed it had also synced to some cloud backup Robert had set up for the family devices, one that apparently shared automatically to a private group chat with about 40 relatives and family friends. 40 people had just watched everything unfold in real time. I looked up at Robert. He was crying now, properly crying, his shoulders shaking. "Dad, please, we can fix this. We can delete it, we can explain. Please don't let this ruin everything." I stood up slowly, and a strange calm settled over me, the kind of calm that comes after a storm finally breaks. I looked at that tablet one more time, and understood something clearly for the first time all night. This hadn't been some plan for revenge. Caleb hadn't done this to punish anyone. He'd done it because he loved me, because he couldn't stand watching someone he loved be treated like garbage, and because some part of him, young as he was, already understood what was right and what wasn't. I turned to Diane, who was trembling now, every ounce of her earlier bravado gone. "You told me poor people don't belong at your table," I said, my voice low and even, "and you might be right. I don't think I ever did belong here. But you know something? Watching your whole world find out exactly who you are is going to be the finest gift I get this Christmas." I handed the tablet back to Caleb. "Bud," I said, "this might be the best Christmas present anyone's ever given me." I turned to leave. Robert grabbed my arm as I passed. "Dad, please don't go, we can talk about this." "Talk about what, Robert?" I said, pulling my arm free. "You watched her hit me. You told me to say I was sorry. You're my son, and tonight you treated me like I was nothing at all. There's no fixing that tonight." I looked at Whitney next. "I welcomed you into this family," I said. "You treated me like something you needed to explain away to your friends." Then I looked at Diane. "You wanted to be queen of this house tonight. Enjoy it. It might be the last night anybody looks at you like that." I walked out through that cold, sterile living room and out the front door into the freezing night air. I pulled on my old coat, the same one I'd been embarrassed to wear a few hours earlier, and it felt different now, heavier in a good way, like something I'd earned rather than something to hide. As I walked down that long paved driveway, I could hear shouting and crying starting up behind me through the windows, the whole perfect evening collapsing in on itself. In the days that followed, the video spread further than anyone in that house could have imagined. Someone in that family group chat shared it outside the group, and from there it moved fast, the way things do now. A wealthy woman striking an elderly man at his own family's Christmas dinner was exactly the kind of thing people couldn't look away from. Local news picked it up within a week. Diane was quietly asked to step down from her seat on a hospital charity board. Whitney's law firm placed her on leave after partners saw the footage circulating among clients. Nobody wanted their name near what had happened in that dining room. Robert called me constantly in the weeks after, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, begging for a chance to explain, to apologize, to make some kind of public statement smoothing everything over. He never once apologized for what he'd actually done. He apologized because his life had come apart at the seams and he needed someone to blame less than he needed someone to fix it. I didn't answer most of those calls. I knew that if I let myself hear his voice, all that old hurt would come rushing back in, and I wasn't ready to carry that weight again so soon. A man doesn't owe forgiveness to someone who watched him fall and chose comfort over him. That's a lesson I learned late in life, but I learned it all the same. Months passed. Spring came, and with it, a small envelope in my mailbox with Caleb's handwriting scrawled across the front. My address copied carefully from something, probably an old holiday card. Inside was a drawing, the two of us sitting on a bench somewhere, an ice cream cone in each of our hands, badly drawn but full of care. He wrote that he missed me. He wrote that he was sorry things had gotten so bad, though he hadn't done anything wrong at all. He wrote that he'd lost his tablet privileges for 2 months, but that he didn't regret it, not even a little. He was the only one in that entire house who understood, really understood what had happened that night. The slap had faded from my cheek within a day. What lingered far longer was the silence of every adult in that room. But in the end, it wasn't the silence that stayed with me either. It was the sound of my grandson's voice, small and unwavering, asking a question so simple that none of the grown-ups in that room had been brave enough to ask it themselves. He gave me back something that night I hadn't realized I'd lost. Sometimes the only justice a man needs in this life is the truth, spoken plainly, by the smallest voice in the room.